You won't regret it, I promise. Subscribe. My name is Richard Hayes. I'm 68. I am the man they laughed at, the founder reduced to a tremor in his own building. And if you think I'm exaggerating, you've never heard your child turn your life's work into a punchline. I built my logistics company in Chicago with frostbitten fingers and a stomach that learned to digest anxiety like coffee. Do you know what that tastes like? Burnt pennies and bravado. For 40 years, I stacked roots like prayers, threaded trucks through lake-effect snow, paid guys in boots before I paid myself, and gave my son the softest chair at my table because I thought legacy, not love, was the sincerest form of care. Isn't that the old man's trick feed them tomorrow because today is too sharp? The boardroom sits on the 20th floor, glass on two sides, the Chicago River slicing past like a cold vein. I can see the merchandise mart, the bridges, the roofs that fill with snow like white lies. That morning, the windows were so clean they looked like absence. Ethan stood at the end of the table in a navy suit he wore like a costume expensive. Yes, but a little too shiny, a little too eager to be seen. Beside him, our counsel whispered in a voice built for obituaries. Across from me, the old guard truckers turned supervisors. Supervisors turned directors sat with hands folded respectfully, as if the body were still in the room. I'm stepping back, I said. As of next quarter. I thought that would be my line, like a last decent bow before the orchestra plays me off. But endings are rarely invited. They arrive as hecklers. Ethan smirked. He didn't even flinch at how quickly the vacuum formed. Don't worry, Dad, he said, loud enough to carry over the ventilation. I'll take care of the scraps you left behind. Scraps. It hit like a bolt through old wood. Someone laughed, a thin laugh, a scared laugh, the kind that hides under desks. It ricocheted off the windows until the river seemed to snicker. I felt my ribcage sink, an implosion you might not have noticed unless you were counting my breaths. I looked for my allies, Horace, who started in dispatch with a corkscrew and a notepad. Rosa, who once drove through a blizzard so I wouldn't break a promise, but eyes went down, a choreography of self-protection. You ask why I didn't walk out? Because humiliation is a glue. It fixes you in place so everyone can admire the fit. On my office wall hangs a frame with a paper gone yellow at the corners. The first freight contract I ever signed. 1,986. Palatine to Peoria. 6 pallets of automotive parts. The signature is mine, looping and naive. That paper is the house key of my life. After the meeting, I shut the door and stood in front of it, chin nearly touching the glass. Palatine to Peoria. It smelled don't laugh like diesel and damp cardboard, though I know that's phantom memory. I pressed my thumb to the glass to leave a grease moon, a private semaphore to remind me I had a pulse. I should have told Ethan I wasn't retiring, that I'd changed my mind, that his cruelty had resurrected the working animal in me. But I did nothing. I put the frame straight. I packed a few books and a chess set nobody ever used. I took the photo of him at 12, face open and stubborn, sitting in a truck cab holding the wheel like a promise. I left my nameplate on the desk, as if a sheriff would come by tomorrow and evict the letters. Cowardice has its own neat rituals. The first night of retirement, my apartment near Navy Pier felt like a rental from someone else's better life. Stainless steel and staged rugs. The lake clapped slow against the pilings. The air tasted metallic, as if the city were chewing foil. I poured myself bourbon and cooked nothing. I bit down on humiliated silence and let it warm my throat. You ever listen to a refrigerator talk to you after midnight? It mumbles about everything you avoided. It repeats your insults back to you in the voice of your child. There are smells that belong to defeat bleach from the building hallway. The starch of a button-down shirt you didn't wear. The coffee you made for 2 out of habit and threw half away. I slept on the couch and woke to a sun that felt accusatory, like a foreman with a clipboard. On the pier, joggers performed their sterile self-respect. I watched them through the window and asked the empty room, is this what legacy buys a view of other people's breath? I tried to be a retiree for 3 entire days. I reviewed my finances like they were a novel with a dull middle. I went to a matinee and left before the 3rd act because the hero was 35 and still learning how to speak to his father. I bought a sailboat magazine in a gesture toward the fantasy I used to keep under my desk, like a bottle. Miami. The word is all vowel, like a sigh you pay for. The pages smelled like varnish and sunscreen. People in crisp polish smiling as if water forgives everything. On the fourth day, gossip found me because it knows where shame sleeps. Rosa called. Her voice carried the static of a break room. I shouldn't be telling you, she began, which means she absolutely should. He's rewriting Roots Rich, cutting Aurora. You called your Palatine Peoria account a museum piece. I felt heat climb my neck, a ladder to a room I'd sworn not to re-enter. Thank you, Rosa, I said, and that was all. I put down the phone like it had stung me. Aurora wasn't just a dot. It was a promise I made to a plant manager in 1993, a man whose daughter was in chemo and who asked me to keep the Saturday run because his guys needed the overtime. You think trucks are just trucks. No. They're church bells. They're casseroles delivered warm to the widow. They're a father's apology delivered in the form of a pallet arriving on time. The next day, I walked. Michigan Avenue was a runway of people pretending not to shop their identities. The wind off the river was a blade. Every third block, one of my trucks passed Hayes in letters. I had taped onto a rented box truck with my own hands back when decals were too expensive. I counted them like rosary beads, each one a reminder I still existed in motion somewhere. Wasn't that the point? To be a verb, not a noun? I won't pretend I turned heroic overnight. I went back to the office building and stood across the river like a tourist, staring up at the windows. I thought if I looked long enough, I could make the glass confess. Instead, I saw myself reflected beside the architecture, a man in a dark coat with a face that had become his father's. There's a cruelty in inheritance no one admits. You become the man you wanted to impress. Ethan's mother, Nora, would have told me to go back in and fight. We divorced when he was 16, when my nights were welded to a dispatch desk, and she found a gentler version of affection in someone who left work at 5. She died 6 years ago too fast, too polite about it. And if you asked me what she'd say, now I'd tell you she'd stand in my kitchen, open the fridge, take a bite of leftover roast, and say, "Stop sulking. Rich, do something you'll regret less." That evening the trigger came, as triggers do, in the casual clothing of a phone call you could have missed. I was washing a coffee cup that didn't need washing. The phone vibrated against the counter, a number from Boston. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, as if the conversation would judge my fingerprints. "Hayes," I answered, defaulting to the old trucker bark because weakness is a language. Once you start speaking it, it stains your vowels. "Richie," said the voice. Only 3 people alive called me that. This one smokes cigarettes and apology. It's Calvin DeMarco, Cal DeMarco Freight. We met in '92 in a warehouse that smelled like wet pine and hot coffee. We loaded pallets together because his dock crew went home for a funeral, and I didn't want to lose the lane. He owed me favors the way men owe each other stories. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. "Cal," I said carefully, "I hear you've retired. News travels like a rumor," I said. He let that sit. Good men traffic in silences when words feel like lies. "You still got a say in your board?" he asked finally. I could feel my scalp prickling. I looked at the framed first contract across the room as if it were an oracle. "Why?" "Because some kid from your shop called us," Cal said. "Said he's trimming Midwest lanes. Wanted to sell off the Joliet warehouse. What do you call it? The old shed." "The old shed. It isn't much to a spreadsheet brick, stubborn. More community bulletin board than asset sheet. But it's where I signed that first contract on a paint-stained desk. The same place where Nora once brought Ethan in pajamas to watch the snowplows and drink cocoa while I rerouted trucks like a man arranging the bones of a skeleton. It's Chicago compressed into a structure. Ugly, stubborn, useful. He can't sell that, I said. My voice surprised me with its fatherhood. It's tied into... I stopped. I was about to say something he didn't need to know yet. He just can't. Cal inhaled, a sound like wind between pallet rows. "I'm telling you because I owe you," he said. "And because the boy sounded like he was auditioning for a role he thinks he deserves." He paused. "Richie, you want me to hold off on any conversations? I can sit on my hands 3 days. After that, my own board starts gnawing at me." I looked at my reflection in the black window. A man staring at himself in a dark panel like a portrait of stubbornness. Do you believe in moments? Not the kind photographers stage, but the ugly ones in kitchens where dishwater cools. I do. I believe in a small click inside the chest that reintroduces you to yourself. Hold off, I told Cal. If you can. For you, he said, and hung up. I stood there, the phone heavy as a verdict. The apartment hummed. The lake whispered its dumb advice. I walked to the frame over the couch and took down the first contract. The hanging wire squealed, a tired animal. I carried the frame to the kitchen table and set it down like a body. My hand shook age or anger. Choose your doctor. The glass caught the ceiling light and turned my face into a ghost over my own name. Palatine to Peoria. I read the clauses. Even then, I wrote in certain protections because failure had taught me to expect betrayal from weather, if nothing else. This is where I tell you the schema of humiliation. First they reduce your voice, then they repurpose your relics, then they ask you to officiate the funeral of your own relevance. I won't participate. Will you judge me for that? Will you call me petty because I couldn't swallow the word scraps like a vitamin? I took the contract out of the frame, slid a butter knife under the backing, and lifted the rusted tabs. The paper felt like dried skin. There, in the margin, my handwriting. First right of refusal on sale transfer of old shed. Tied to Route 1, a continuity. It was a sloppier clause than a lawyer would tolerate, but we were small then and favors outran law. Still, there it was. A string I had forgotten tying one corner of my empire to my name. More knot than ribbon. I phoned Rosa at home. She answered on the second ring, breathless the way people are when they've been carrying worry. Rosa, I said, listen carefully. If anyone asks about the old shed, you say it's bound to 1A and 1A's bound to me. She exhaled like the tea kettle had been lifted. I knew there was something, she said, fierce now, loyal. He thinks history is just a story you tell interns. History is liens and signatures, I said. It's bolts and rebar. And kitchens, she added. You sound like you're in yours. I laughed. The first sound that didn't taste like blood in a week. I am. You're not going to let him sell it, she said. It wasn't a question. I'm not going to let him forget who built it, I said. That was the closest I could get to mercy. After we hung up, I made a list. Not revenge, no. Lists are for groceries and battles. I wrote names that felt like ballast. Horace, Rosa, Fiona in accounts, who knows where every dollar sleeps. Raymond, who still carries a picture of his first truck in his wallet like a grandson. Old man Weiss from Cicero, who owns half a mile of warehouse roof and trusts a handshake if it's mine. And in the margin, Cal DeMarco hold 3 days. The ink looked steadier than I felt. I wandered the apartment, restless and floating. The sailboat magazine lay open on the counter, a teak deck gleaming like a lie. I flipped it shut. I opened the window and let the lake air slap me. Somewhere a siren flirted with a corner. A couple argued on the sidewalk's soft barbs, elongated names. The city sounded like a stomach digesting regret. I looked at the old shed clause again until the words became texture, until my vision pulsed and steadied. I called Ethan, straight to voicemail. His outgoing message was too casual. You know what to do. Do I? Has anyone? Ever? I didn't leave a message because fathers shouldn't make threats on tape. Instead, I typed him a text so precise it could draw blood. Do not move on old shed. Contractual encumbrance tied to one at call me. I didn't send it. I stared at the bubble until it felt childish. I deleted it and wrote 3 words. We need to talk. Childish, but at least not a roadmap to my arsenal. You want the truth? I sat at that table and cried without sound. Not because he'd hurt me, though he had, but because I had taught him he could. I gave him the river view before he learned what a bridge cost. I told him he was special when I should have told him he was responsible. Isn't that the real bequest we fumble teaching our children the weight of names? The next morning, I shaved like a man reporting to a job. My hand steadied around the razor with an old competence. I'd put on a gray suit that had hung like a threat in my closet. I ate eggs because men in my father's generation believed protein could armor a person. Down on the street, a delivery guy rolled a dolly full of water cases over a pothole and didn't curse, and I respected him for that. On Lakeshore Drive, The air had that September Christmas that makes promise feel plausible. I turned off on Grand and parked in a garage that charges in salt by the minute. I walked to the river and crossed the bridge as a barge moved beneath, slow and unashamed. In the lobby of my building, the security guard, a kid with kind eyes and a beard that tried too hard, stood up a little when he saw me, then sat, unsure of protocol. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," he said, and I thought, there it is. A name still has weight if you carry it like steel. Upstairs, I didn't go to my old office. Not yet. I walked the operations floor. The room smelled like toner and old coffee, and that particular anxiety of screens. Fiona glanced up, startled into a smile. "Mr. Hayes," she said, and her voice landed on the mister like a hand on the shoulder. "I'm just visiting," I lied. She nodded toward the glassed-in conference room where he sat, my son, in meeting posture, arms spread on chair arms like a small emperor resting his wings. He was speaking to a group of younger hires who took notes with the zeal of converts. He saw me through the glass. A flicker crossed his face, annoyance first, then a quick inventory, then the smooth surface he thinks is leadership. He lifted a hand in a gesture that meant nothing. I lifted mine back because there is dignity in refusing to translate. I didn't go in, not yet. Not with my heart beating a bass drum under my tie. I stood with Fiona and talked about invoices. Under the surface, I listened to the air vents, to the copy machines, to the way the building's bones creaked when it settled. I listened for the sound of something I knew better than my own breathing, the company remembering me. Back in the hallway, I leaned against the wall and looked at the framed photos of our earliest trucks boxy. White, earnest. The captions I'd written myself. Route 1A, first winner. Wise Partnership Year 1. Aurora Run saves Christmas Rosa. I smiled. The building had memorialized my handwriting. Ethan hadn't gotten around to erasing that yet. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a Boston area code. 3 days start now. Cal's clock. The message had the gravity of a judge's gavel. And just then, as if the building had decided to confess to me alone, a door I'd never seen used swung open at the end of the corridor. Out stepped a woman in a skirt suit the color of stormwater, carrying a cardboard tube under her arm. She looked at me and paused, as one pauses at a painting of a person who might be an ancestor. "Mr. Hayes?" she said. "Yes," I said, because that is my name. "I've got documents for you," she said. "Your son told me to send them to his office, but your name is on the originals." She extended the tube. My hand went to it the way a hand goes to a rope thrown from a boat. I unscrewed the cap. Inside, architectural plans, blue ink on onion skin, the old shed drawn in loving scale, annotated with phrases like demolition schedule and parcel consolidation. I looked up at her, and I must have smiled in a way that frightened. "Thank you," I said. She hesitated. "Should I tell him?" I shook my head. "No," I said softly. "Let's let him find out the old way." "The old way?" she asked. "In a room," I said, "with a door that shuts." I carried the tube down the hall like a banner, past the conference room glass where my son talked about efficiencies as if they were ethics. I walked into my old office and closed the door on the noise of his voice. The contract lay on the table, my note in the margin circled anxiously by time, the plans unrolled beside it, the lines crisp and cool. I took a pen. I began to write names, dates, hooked arrows, a sequence. "You want a confession? Here's mine." I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted him to understand the cost of laughter. The phone rang again. Not Boston, Chicago. A number I knew by muscle memory, one I hadn't called in years. When I answered, a voice I had once trusted to read weather like scripture said, "Rich, heard something about Joliet. You in on this?" I looked out at the river and the bridge swiveling for a tourist boat, and I felt the city tilt slightly, as if it were choosing sides. "I am now," I said. "Meet me at the old shed tonight." You ever notice how a place listens differently at night? The old shed creaks like it's breathing, like it remembers every pallet that scraped its floor, every shouted order, every thermos of soup emptied on a freezing shift. When I pushed the heavy door open that night, the smell rushed at me. Dust, oil, rust, coffee that seeped into wood. You can't buy that smell. You can't fake it. Cal was already there, sitting on a crate with a cigarette burning low between his fingers. He looked older than the last time I saw him, cheeks hollow, hair gone steel, but the eyes were still narrow, skeptical. He nodded when he saw me. Thought maybe you wouldn't come. I never stopped coming here, I said, running my hand along the wall. Rough brick, cold, like bone. He grunted. The boy's green. Ambitious, but green. Wants to turn heritage into cash. You gonna stop him or just mourn it? That question is the one that pulled something out of me. For weeks I'd been sleepwalking through humiliation, pretending I could drink my way out of a wound. But now, in the old shed, with that smell, with that friend, I heard my own voice again. I'm not going to mourn it, I said. I'm going to remind him who taught him ambition. The next weeks became a ritual. Mornings, I put on the gray suit. Nights, I called in markers like a gambler too stubborn to fold. You'd be surprised how many people remember a favor done quietly 30 years ago. Boston first. I flew out on a Monday. Seat 1-4, a middle-aged woman beside me knitting something with navy yarn. She never looked up. Flying east felt like rewinding time, the sun catching me younger. I landed at Logan, where the air tastes of salt and jet fuel, and met Cal in a diner that hadn't remodeled since the Carter administration. The waitress poured coffee that scalded the tongue but stayed hot forever, the way coffee used to. DeMarco Freight still owes me one, Cal said. We're not walking away from Hayes' roots. He slid a napkin across the table, numbers scribbled, new contracts, fresh commitments. It wasn't just business. It was a declaration. The old man still has gravity. From Boston, I went to Philadelphia, then Cleveland. I shook hands with men whose joints crackled, women who remembered my wife's laughter in a Christmas party in '91, dispatchers who still had my number on sticky notes, yellowed with age. They welcomed me not because I was powerful, but because I hadn't forgotten them when I was. Do you understand that difference? That's loyalty. That's the marrow of an empire. Each signature I gathered was a stitch closing a wound. Each handshake a breath that pulled me back into my skin. Ethan thought the company was his stage. He didn't realize the play was mine and always had been. But at night, when I came back to my apartment by Navy Pier, silence still ambushed me. The apartment was too clean, too polished, like a hotel waiting for a guest who never arrives. I'd cook a single steak, slice it down the middle, and leave half in the fridge out of old habit. Sometimes I'd set the table for two without thinking. That's the problem with dignity. It doesn't keep you warm. I'd sit by the window, glass of bourbon in hand, and watch my trucks. They'd pass down Lower Wacker, headlights cutting through the underground gloom, diesel engines echoing against concrete. I knew each sound, the cough of an overworked clutch, the hum of a properly tuned engine. They were my lullabies, and also my reminders. You still exist, Hayes. You still matter. On one of those nights, I pulled out the photo of Ethan at 12, sitting in that truck cab, hands too small for the wheel, smile too wide for the world. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. What did I do wrong? Did I make him think the world owed him because I never let him feel its teeth? Isn't it strange how love can rot into entitlement if you wrap it too tightly? Back at the office, whispers began. I'd walk the operations floor, casual, shaking hands, asking questions about invoices, routes, delays. I wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan hadn't invited me, but no one told me to leave. Old loyalties run deeper than new authority. Mr. Hayes, Raymond said one afternoon, voice low, your boy doesn't understand margins. Wants to cut Joliet before Christmas. People depending on that overtime. I nodded, felt the old rage simmer. Ethan was treating legacy like trash pickup out with the old. Who cares about the smell? He thought cost-cutting was genius when it was just cowardice dressed as efficiency. I started keeping a notebook, small leather-bound, hidden in my coat. In it, I wrote names, dates, favors. Each page a quiet arsenal. My handwriting got steadier, my lines cleaner. Writing itself was revenge, don't you think? Proof I hadn't surrendered. Then came the dinner. Ethan invited me, maybe out of guilt, maybe to parade me like a relic in front of his friends. The restaurant was one of those new places on Randolph Street, all reclaimed wood and overpriced cocktails. He sat at the head of the table, young executives flanking him like soldiers. Dad, he said, glass raised. To you, the man who showed me the ropes, even if those ropes are a little frayed now. Laughter. Always laughter. I smiled. I even lifted my glass. But inside, I was counting. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissal. You don't see a knife sharpening while it rests in its sheath. The turning point came in the form of an object, a warehouse deed, hidden deep in archives, still bearing my name. I found it with Rose's help, down in the basement filing room that smelled of mold and ink. The paper was brittle, but the ink clear. Richard Hayes, sole guarantor of Route 1 Properties. Ethan hadn't dug this deep. He thought history was his to rewrite. He forgot it. I wrote it in ink too stubborn to fade. I held that deed in my hands and felt a pulse, as if the building itself were whispering, "Welcome back." And I whispered back, "I never left." But here's the truth. Reader, each victory came with loneliness. My son despised me more with every move I made. My board began to whisper not just about Ethan's arrogance, but about Richard Hayes rising from the ashes. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt hollow, because revenge is a double-edged gift. Yes, it restores dignity, but it also takes something you can't return. I'd look at that photo of Ethan, 12 years old, and wonder, by winning, what would I lose forever? I'll let you answer that. Would you have kept going? Would you have let your only child turn you into a footnote? Or would you sharpen your knives as I did? I made my choice. And the next step was already waiting. New York, the shareholders' meeting. But before that stage, I had one more move to make, one more ally to secure, one more betrayal to witness. Because the old shed had secrets even Ethan didn't know. And I was about to remind him that walls remember more than sons do. It began, as many wars do, with silence. I didn't storm back into my office, didn't slam doors, didn't raise my voice. Instead, I walked those halls the way an old priest walks his church, slowly, reverently, and with a knowledge that the congregation listens more closely to whispers than to sermons. Employees looked up when I passed. Some smiled, some hesitated, some pretended not to notice. But every nod, every murmured, "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," was a brick returned to my crumbling wall of dignity. Ethan didn't see it. He was too busy basking in the light of his own reflection. One Thursday, I stood outside the boardroom while Ethan presented his efficiency strategy through the glass. I watched him gesture at charts, colorful nonsense, digital fireworks. He talked about streamlining assets, divesting outdated properties, and there it was again, the old shed on the list, reduced to a bullet point, a liability. He didn't see me, but Horace, sitting at the far end of the table, did. His eyes flicked up, caught mine through the glass. He gave the faintest nod. That was enough. Horace had been with me since dispatch days, when our office was a diner booth and a phone line that barely worked. If Horace still carried my flag, others would follow. The confrontation came at dinner. Ethan invited me again, this time to the Peninsula Hotel, private dining room, just the two of us. I think he wanted to stage a victory lap, a father-son reconciliation performed like theater. "Dad," he said, swirling wine that cost more than my first truck, "I need you to understand something. Business has changed. Sentiment doesn't scale. Legacy doesn't pay dividends. I'm not insulting what you built. I'm just saying it's time to move forward." "Forward," I repeated. "By tearing down the walls that held us up." He leaned back, smug. "You're clinging to relics. Joliet, Aurora, the shed, they're all dead weight. I'll turn them into capital, real growth." "And the people?" I asked. "The ones who raised their families on those roots? The ones who gave you loyalty long before you earned it?" "People adjust," he said, with a shrug that tasted of cruelty. "You taught me that. Did I? God help me, maybe I did. Maybe I showed him that survival meant cutting loose what you couldn't carry. But what I meant as endurance, he translated into contempt. I wanted to shout. Instead, I sipped my water, kept my face stone. "If you sell the shed," I said, "you'll regret it." He laughed. Actually laughed. "What are you going to do, Dad? Come back and save the company? You don't even have a seat anymore." He thought I was finished. That's the beauty of arrogance. It blinds a man to the shadows around him. Back in my apartment, I unrolled the warehouse deed again, laid it beside the first contract. Paper, brittle but binding. Ink, faded, but still legal. These weren't relics. They were weapons. I called Rosa. "It's time," I said. She didn't ask what I meant. "Then you'll meet Weiss," she said. "And Fiona. They'll follow you if they know the shed is safe." Safe, I repeated. Funny word for a building that smelled of rust and ghosts. But she was right. The shed wasn't just brick. It was leverage. And leverage, in the right hands, was destiny. So I began to counter, quietly, relentlessly. I met with Weiss over cigars in Cicero, where the roof leaked, but his memory didn't. I visited Fiona after hours, stacks of invoices between us, proving Ethan's recklessness in numbers sharper than knives. Piece by piece, I built my return. Not loud, not visible, just inevitable. And Ethan? He kept laughing. That was his mistake, because soon he would walk into the New York shareholders meeting believing the empire was already his. And I would be waiting with the crown he thought he'd stolen still in my hands, polished by years of patience. Would you call that vengeance? Or would you call it balance restored? I leave that to you, but understand this. When a father is mocked, he does not retire. He sharpens. The ballroom at the New York Hilton smelled of stale perfume and ambition. Chandeliers threw down a false kind of light, glittering, but harsh enough to remind you of every wrinkle. The shareholders' meeting was supposed to be a coronation, Ethan's chance to show Wall Street that Hayes Logistics was no longer a family business, but a sleek machine with him at the wheel. I arrived early. Old habit. A general walks the battlefield before dawn. The stage was dressed in banners, blue and white. The Hayes logo stretched until it looked abstract, like something soulless. I sat near the back, quiet, coat folded over my arm. A few heads turned. Whispers rose. Some of the old guard smiled, tentative, like soldiers seeing their commander return after rumor of death. Others frowned, uncertain which way the wind would blow. And then Ethan entered. He strode in like a prince, silk tie glowing, a smirk polished for cameras. Applause followed him, loud but brittle. He took the podium, tapped the microphone, and began. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for believing in the future of Hayes Logistics. Today we turn a page. We shed the inefficiencies of the past. We embrace growth, technology, and vision." Applause again. But in my ear, those words "shed inefficiencies" sounded like code for "erase my father." Slide after slide flashed on the screen. Profit projections, asset sales, new investments. My old shed was there, labeled Phase 1 divestiture. He called it a liability. The word landed in my gut like a knife. I waited. You must understand. Timing is everything. If you move too soon, you look desperate. Too late, you look weak. So I sat there, hands folded, until the vote was called. Ethan's voice swelled. "With your approval, we will proceed with the restructuring. And I, as your CEO, will carry Hayes Logistics into its rightful future." He was so sure, so smug. And then the ballots appeared on the screens, digital, efficient, merciless. Shareholders tapped their votes. Green for yes, red for no. Ethan smiled, certain of victory, until the numbers shifted. First one column, then another. Green faltered, red rose. Confusion rippled across the room. Ethan's smile twitched. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What?" he began, but the moderator cut him off. "Majority control remains with Mr. Richard Hayes." The words rang out like a gavel. Silence followed, thick as snow. Heads turned toward me. Cameras swiveled. Ethan's face drained, the smirk gone, replaced with the raw look of a boy caught lying. I stood, slowly. No triumph in my movements, only gravity. "I negotiated those contracts 30 years ago," I said, voice steady. "I built this company on promises written in ink that does not fade. You cannot sell what is bound to my name. You cannot erase what is still living." Murmurs swelled. A few clapped. Horace, in the corner, actually stood, eyes bright. Rosa smiled through tears she didn't wipe away. Ethan stammered. This isn't possible. When my team ran the numbers, I interrupted, don't carry freight. People do, and they still answer my calls. That shut him down. The vote finalized. Control back in my hands. Ethan's empire dissolved in the space of a heartbeat. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching him stand there, trembling, lips pressed into a thin line that was punishment enough. I walked to the podium. For a moment, we stood side by side, father and son, builder and pretender. He wouldn't look at me. "Ethan," I said softly, only for him, though the microphone caught it. "You forgot the first rule. Legacy isn't given. It's earned." His jaw clenched. His eyes glistened with something he wouldn't name. Anger? Shame? Maybe both. I turned to the crowd. The company is not a relic. It is a living promise. And promises are not sold off to the highest bidder. Not while I breathe. The applause this time was different. Not brittle. Solid. It rolled through the room like thunder. I left the stage with the deed to the old shed in my pocket, my name on the contracts, and silence trailing behind my son. But victory, you see, is a bitter wine. Sweet on the tongue, acid in the throat. Because in that moment of triumph, I felt something break that no vote could mend. A father can reclaim his crown, but at what cost to the boy who once wore it in play? And that, reader, was the beginning of my real reckoning. The train back to Chicago was quieter than I expected. I had chosen rail over plane on purpose. Air travel is too abrupt. All noise and sky, no time to think. The train, though, gives you hours of rattling reflection. Steel wheels grinding out a confession you can't dodge. Out the window, the Midwest rolled by in flat grays and browns. The farms bending under autumn winds. Silos like tired sentinels. In the dining car, I ordered coffee that tasted like tin and bacon that fought the teeth. I chewed anyway. Victory has no flavor when eaten alone. Do you know what surprised me most? It wasn't the humiliation of Ethan's silence at the shareholders' meeting, nor the applause in my name. No, it was the way the chair beside me stayed empty. I wanted Nora there. I wanted her hand on mine, her dry humor cutting through my self-importance. I wanted to hear her tell me if I'd done right, or if I'd only carved a larger distance between father and son. Would she have called me cruel or necessary? When I returned to Chicago, the old shed was waiting. I went there the next morning, coat collar turned up against the river wind. The door groaned the same way it had 30 years ago. Inside, the smell hit me again. Oil, wood, sweat, and something older, something like devotion. Dust drifted in the light from broken windows, floating like ghosts. I sat on a crate and unfolded the deed once more. My name, my ink, my stubborn handwriting. Still binding, still alive. I thought about Ethan, the boy who once played with toy trucks on this very floor, who begged me to honk the horn, who fell asleep with his head against my shoulder on long drives. Where had that boy gone? Or had I buried him beneath expectations, beneath pressure, beneath the myth of legacy? The shed answered in its own way with silence. Silence that wasn't empty, but watchful, as if the walls wanted me to admit something I'd avoided. And I did. I whispered into the dust. I gave him too much, too soon. I thought love meant inheritance. I was wrong. That afternoon, Ethan came. I knew he would. Pride drives a man into confrontation just as surely as rage. He walked into the shed with sharp footsteps, anger radiating from him like heat off asphalt. His suit was immaculate, but his face was cracked, sleepless. "Congratulations," he said bitterly. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Was that the plan? To humiliate your own son?" I stood, slowly. "No. The plan was to remind you who built the ground you're standing on. You think I don't know that?" His voice broke, and there it was, the boy, under the arrogance. "You think I don't wake up every day knowing I can't match you? That everything I touch feels borrowed? You handed me an empire I didn't build, Dad, and now you punish me for not being you." The words cut deeper than any insult he'd ever thrown. I wanted to tell him I had no choice, that men of my generation only knew how to love through provision, through the weight of assets and signatures. But explanations are cheap. What matters is what you hand over when all your excuses are gone. So I took the deed, folded it once, and placed it in his hands. His eyes widened. "What is this?" "The old shed," I said. "Yours. Not to sell, not to gut, not to erase. Yours to learn from. If you can protect one place, maybe you'll understand how to protect the whole." He stared at the paper, confused, angry, maybe even afraid. His lips trembled, searching for the right performance. But there was no audience here, just me, and walls too old to be fooled. Why? He whispered finally. Because legacy isn't about ownership, I said. It's about stewardship. You can laugh at me, belittle me, try to erase me, but you can't deny where you came from. The shed remembers. And now it remembers you too. We stood there, silence heavy as wet wool. Then he shoved the deed back against my chest, hard enough to sting. I don't need your relics. And he left. The door slammed. Dust fell from the rafters. And the shed sighed as if it had seen this all before, fathers and sons misunderstanding each other, generation after generation. That night, I walked the streets of Chicago. Michigan Avenue was loud with tourists. Navy Pier lit up like a carnival. I passed one of my trucks on Lower Wacker, headlights bouncing off concrete, the driver honking when he saw me. I raised a hand. He waved back. That small gesture filled me more than any applause in New York. Do you know what it means to be seen, not as a relic, not as a joke, but as a man still standing? I returned to my apartment, poured bourbon, and sat at the window. Across the glass, the lake stretched dark and endless. I thought of Ethan in his high-rise, perhaps pacing, perhaps drinking, perhaps cursing my name. I thought of Nora, whose absence was the only true silence in my life. And I thought of legacy not as wealth, not as contracts, but as dignity. Here is my confession. I did not destroy him. I could have. I had the contracts, the board, the power. But I gave him the shed instead, a reminder, a challenge, a chance. Whether he takes it or not, that's his story to write. Mine is simpler. I am no longer a founder fading into irrelevance. I am Richard Hayes, a man who refused to be erased, who reclaimed his voice when his own blood tried to silence it. Do you call that revenge? Maybe, but it felt more like resurrection. And if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Never surrender your worth. Not to strangers, not to time, not even to your own children. Because respect, once lost, can be won back, but only if you have the stomach to fight for it. So I sit here tonight, bourbon in hand, the city humming below me, the truck still rolling. And I tell you, my name is still mine. My legacy is still alive. The laughter is gone. Only the echo of my footsteps remains steady, certain, unbroken. Thank you so much for staying with me this far. Your support means everything to us. How about helping us grow even more? Share our page with your friends and follow us so you don't miss any updates. Thanks.